All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Did You Know the ESCO HVAC show. We're hanging out today with Howard Weiss. How are you, sir?
Doing good, and yourself?
I am absolutely doing wonderful. And I think Jason is going to join us in a little bit later and kind of touch on some things he's been working with in this sector as well. So we get a lot of calls at the office, right? ESCO is the premier certifier of EPA608 in the industry. And a lot of conversations have been coming in, calls have been coming in of, wow, there's a lot of things going on. You know, is my current license good for A2L refrigerants? And when's things happening? And we hear buzzes about stuff changing, but what does it actually mean? Hey, thanks, George. Appreciate you. What does it mean to us, right? We know that things are in a motion. We know that we're in this evolution of our industry. And how does it all happen? Is it the EPA's fault? We get that one a lot, don't we, Howard?
Or is it our fault?
Is it our fault? You know, we get blamed for, you're the ones that write that test and you got to be the ones that set the standards. We're like the very end of the row, right? We're at the very bottom of the table. So we are going to help you understand exactly what all of these processes look like. Now, this is going to be a tad bit of a history show as well. Y'all know I love history. But this really is our industry and how things happen. So let's start. Oh, by the way, let us know where you're calling in from, chiming in from, watching the video, hanging out with your phone, eating some popcorn. We want to know where everyone's at and what stage of the industry you're in, because we're all in this together, right? This is a group effort. And we're here to make sure that we all understand what's happening, because there are some things that are going to be happening in just a few weeks that could potentially have some big impacts in our industry. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're definitely going to want to hang in. So it's a little bit later in our progression, but we're going to make sure you completely understand things that are happening in the EPA right now that could change a lot of stuff. So let's step back for a second. All right. Howard, you've kind of talked about this a little bit. Before 1970, what was our air quality like?
That's what Chicago looked like when I was growing up.
I
didn't know there were skyscrapers. I thought snow was always black.
Exactly. I have a hard time imagining that, but I hear that. And so I trust that. I understand that that was what things were like. So we got very serious about this in the late 60s. And so by 1970, we enacted the Clean Air Act, right? What was that? Who brought that about? So there we go. So in 1970, we established the Clean Air Act. Remember, so we had an act of Congress that was signed off by a president. So then we were able to do action with that. So what actions did we do with the Clean Air Act? We actually did a lot of stuff from the Clean Air Act. Our portion of it, everyone says, hey, I've got my 608 card. What is 608? Do you know what 608 is actually for? It's for a lot of stuff, right? So the 608 of the Clean Air Act, it is just a section of the Clean Air Act. And it is designed to prohibit individuals from intentionally venting ozone-depleting substances, right? That was our original refrigerants, our ODPs, ozone-depleting potential chemicals, like our R12s. But that was also for our HCFCs. So we had CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and HCFCs, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. We knew that they had the potential for ozone depletion, so we want to make sure we just weren't letting it go. We weren't releasing it into the atmosphere, because before that, we hear what I would consider horror stories of old R12 systems that were actually pass-through systems. They were direct vent refrigeration circuits, right? R12 went in, R12 went out. So the Clean Air Act established this standard. So those that were maintaining, servicing, repairing, or disposing of air conditioning or refrigeration equipment, that's us, were required now by law to do these certain things. It required that technicians servicing AC and refrigeration equipment pass an EPA-approved examination. Howard, what was the first year that ESCO established an EPA certification?
1993. There were 7 original programs in 1993.
That was it, right? So it was a standard that we now had to set. Will my current 608 still be good with R32? Kind of pieces of it, but not necessarily the safety side of things. Got to remember, This isn't completely designed for technician safety. It's designed to protect the environment by the Environmental Protection Agency, authorized by the Clean Air Act, signed by the president. Okay?
This is a big question we get a lot that people always want to know. Well, the 608 covers, allows me to buy these refrigerants. The EPA is not OSHA.
They don't
They
know.
can't regulate safety. They're two separate issues. That's
Exactly.
why right now there's a separate training program and certification. But that could change, as we'll discuss a little later.
Exactly. James, that's a great question. Why do they keep changing their mind? They're not. They're responding. So the EPA is actually responding to things that change at a higher federal level. And we're going to show you all of these different changes and where they've came from over time. There's a lot of information in this one. It's going to be a pretty full hour. So if we think about what it did all of these things. And any of this information, if you're looking for it, it actually came from EPA.gov. This is all educational resources that comes directly from the Environmental Protection Agency. So it had all these things that it did. It made sure that we had a license, a certificate that showed that we had completed a training course. That certificate allowed us to buy refrigerant. It also had things like reclamation. Now, think about this. The original intent of reclamation was so that if refrigerant became contaminated, say we have a compressor burnout, say we have an improper installation, and the refrigerant becomes contaminated, the original intention was that refrigerant would be removed from the system, taken to a reclamation center where it could be reprocessed and cleaned so it could go back out into the industry. We were supposed to capture, ideally, all of our refrigerant to bring it back to be reprocessed, so that the only time we were removing refrigerant is when it was contaminated and it needed to be cleaned so we can reuse it in other systems. So that was the focus, right? Keeping it out of the atmosphere. So where did that come from in the Clean Air Act? Was it the Clean Air Act? We get that question all the time. And it's not. It is a little bitty piece of what the Clean Air Act did. The Clean Air Act actually had 618 different acts to it. Or, I'm sorry, it had 618 different sections within the act. It had 6 different titles or categories. It kind of looks like 7 because there's a 6A that was for acid deposition control. But we really had 6 different categories that we looked at. So within our category, the one that applies most directly to us, the sections between 601 and 618, one of the things that applied directly to us was the section 608 that dealt with National Recycling and Emission Reduction Program. It was all about reducing emissions from refrigerants. That's all. That's what it was there for. So if we open that up, out of all of those 618 different topics, different sections, this is really all that was given in the Clean Air Act. So Congress developed, President signed, and now authorized the Environmental Protection Agency to do some things. And so the EPA starts at the top of the list and goes, okay, number 1, the administrator shall by no later than January, and keeps going down the list. And so the EPA was now authorized to do things under section 608, Title 6 of the Clean Air Act.
Clifton, we often get questions. Why doesn't Congress just make these decisions?
Yeah, good question, Howard.
We're electing these people, and I think the easy answer, you and I've talked about this, there's no one in Congress. So you've got the House has to pass something, it's ratified by the Senate, then the president signs it. Think about the multitude, the 20,000 foot level they have.
Right.
So we
They're
need
not the specialists.
subject matter experts looking at how do we, in medicine, science, engineering, because one person really can't be, oh, let's talk about at 8 o'clock this morning, balancing the interest of interest rates versus full employment. Then an hour later be talking about fusion and fission or plane safety or messenger RNA vaccines. You need subject matter experts who could take that general outline and then turn it into something that works for that industry.
Absolutely. One of the questions came out, who governs the HVAC industry? Um, Laws, rules, and regulations from all sorts of different angles. It's not one central body. We all have our own parts and pieces to that, right? So we floated along with the Clean Air Act, which established the way that we handled refrigerants. That was really its primary thing, to focus on ozone depleting chemicals like CFCs and HCFCs. So by 1987, we needed to look a little bit deeper. So we got into the Montreal Protocol. So the Montreal Protocol, another president, right? Another president signs the initiative for the Montreal Protocol, which
I
takes us.
encourage people to go to his website, his presidential library. He says this is one of his crowning achievements.
And it set in motion a lot of things that we are actually dealing with right now. Things that we feel that have happened in a short period of time actually started a long time ago. So the Montreal Protocol, it was an international treaty, right, on substances that deplete the ozone. And it created the elimination and production and consumption of these substances so that it would limit the damage to the ozone. We knew that our chemicals were when we came up with the Clean Air Act. We were just trying to control those chemicals. By the time the Montreal Protocol came around, we said, you know what? We got to do something about these chemicals. We've been using these since the 1920s. We're destroying the ozone. We now have to focus on this. So the Montreal Protocol set in motion in 1987 directions to start removing those chemicals from use, right? So we started that motion. We worked down that train. We started finding other replacement refrigerants to replace our CFC, HCFC refrigerants. Most of those ended up in the HFC class. So by 2016, we started diving a little deeper into what we were going to do with chemicals. So we started looking at what was happening with our current refrigerants, which were our hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, many of which are still in use today. And a lot of people believe that these were like long-term replacements. Well, they really weren't. They were never designed for long-term replacements. They were more of an interim replacement refrigerant, right? Thanks for joining us, Hassan. So the Kigali Amendment set into motion another stage for us to focus on. Here's the interesting thing about the Kigali Amendment. The Kigali Amendment actually probably should have moved us further along in this refrigerant transition and this equipment transition than where we are today, right? So the Kigali Amendment was actually organized and administered through the Obama administration. But President Obama did not sign off on it, which meant it had limited capability, right? Well, we won't even get into the politics of it, will we, Howard?
No, it's just people, what you're really trying to explain is all these things take a great deal of time.
And they have to go through multiple layers of evaluation, right? So then now let's take a look at it. Kigali Amendment, where you started in 2016 going, okay, we got to do something about these HFC refrigerants. We need to do it now. Well, we went through another administration that did not sign the Kigali Amendment. And then we got into a third administration that took almost 2 years to be able to sign the Kigali Amendment. So the Kigali Amendment that was initiated in 2016 by the rest of the world was not signed by the United States until October 26th of 2022. Not very long ago, right? Very good question. Why did it take so long? That dives into a whole political side, and not just the politics, but it dives into, well, how long does it take to test these things? How long does it take to come up with new solutions? Howard and I, you were just talking about this.
Well, I don't know if that's a slide coming up, what we were talking about earlier, but some of the projects could take 10 years. So let's just say here, a lot of people ask, where's the retrofit refrigerant for R410A?
That's a great question. What do I use in place of R410A?
Nothing.
There's
Start
none.
recovering like you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Okay. And even if the manufacturers did come up with something, What's the process for the research and development team, then to get it approved by the various industry associations, and then get it S.N.A.P approved? That could take a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to be aware that things start at the top and they work their way down. And along the way, some things get slowed in the process. And so we have to be aware that it's not just an agency like the Environmental Protection Agency or an organization like the ESCO and HVAC Excellence. It is a process to make things happen. So we went through a long period of time. We went from 2016 to 2022 before we actually made the physical commitment, before a president signed off and said, off you go. Everyone go do your part. So very, very short period of time, right? A year ago. So with the Kigali Amendment, things started to escalate. That's why we're all in this mode of escalation, because there were other things that happened in that window between 2016 and 2022, right? So what exactly did the Kigali Amendment do? What was the Kigali Amendment? Well, on October 15th of 2016, U.S. leadership, remember, we wanted this in 2016, 197 countries around the world all agreed that we were going to phase down all HFC chemicals, all hydrofluorocarbon chemicals, whether it was in air conditioning, refrigeration, foam blowing, any application. And the Montreal Protocol was signed in Kigali, Rwanda. And under that amendment, countries committed to cut the production and consumption of HFCs by more than 80% over the next 30 years. And it began. Did anyone see the price of R410A go up last year? Yeah, that's because we actually had our first 10% reduction due to the signing of the Kigali Amendment, right? So we began, it actually started before that, and I'll show you why here in a second. So we began this phase down. Once it was signed off by the president, it was in full order. Started in January of 22. In January of 2024, we are adding an additional 30% reduction. So we will have a 40% reduction of HFC refrigerants January 1st of 2024. Most people are very unaware of that and don't even know where it came from. It started in the Kigali Amendment in 2016. So it's not something that just kind of popped up out of the blue. It's been here.
But the real teeth for it came in the A.I.M Act.
Oh, yeah, that is true.
4 years later.
Exactly. So, Joel, why was there no replacement for R410A? Just because there wasn't. There's no direct replacement that functions in our equipment. Now, are there replacements for R410A in other applications? Very likely, outside of our industry. In our internal compression equipment, our compressors, there's not a drop-in replacement that works with the oil, has the same characteristics of temperatures and pressures, and has the same compression ratios. We don't have same oil return. We do not have it currently. We hope that there are some manufacturers out there that will come up with a resolution. But for right now, if you have an R410A system, when these prices of all of our HFCs just start multiplying in a few months, and there is no R410A replacement, that means you're going to have to put R410A back into these systems. There is nothing to replace.
Let me ask you a question. Prices are based on supply and demand.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why is there a shortage of 410A if people are recovering 410A?
So if we talk about reclamation, anyone out there now let's be honest, right? Is there anyone out there that can say that they have they've recovered and they've reclaimed every amount of refrigerant that they've worked on in their lifetime? Right? Let's be honest. Let's think about these situations that had leaks, because I'm saying if we had a system that had a leak and we didn't immediately repair it and fix it, we are at blame for the release of that refrigerant. Knowingly releasing refrigerant. Have we ever thought about it from that perspective? The intent was to no one ever knowingly release refrigerant. So we weren't focusing on that. We didn't really have any guidance on that, to be honest, out of the original Clean Air Act. There wasn't a lot of specific guidance on when and how do you fix leaks. It was more about do your best not to let it out. And so we've had to make changes along the way to help fine tune our industry, to get us to a place where we understand what we're doing and understand the impacts of our own fault. If we would have been regularly fixing leaks immediately when we found them and regularly reclaiming the refrigerant and getting it back to reclamation facilities, we would have almost not seen an increase in prices. I mean, supply and demand is always going to fluctuate depending on how much equipment we're manufacturing, but not anything like what we're going to be seeing now. So we are not bringing back that additional 40%. This continues to escalate until 2036, and there'll only be 15% left of those HFCs.
Well, and the A.I.M Act was predicated with the 10% last year, 30% next year, on the idea that what people are recovering and reclaiming refrigerant.
Yes.
And what we actually found at the National HVAC Education Conference earlier this year, we had people from EPA and various refrigerant manufacturers saying that that number is actually single digits.
Right.
So that's the real problem. So if anyone wants to know why is refrigerant so expensive, take a look in the mirror.
Bruno, what you're starting to see now that in the past we did have some refrigerant test kits. We've seen a lot more of that in the CFC and HCFC refrigerants, not as much in the HFCs, but there are refrigerant test kits out there. And if you think about it, typically you didn't make anything by taking the refrigerant back. So we were losing time. The only time we were taking it back is if we were already going to a parts store and we were getting something else, and we might take our refrigerant cylinder with us. Well, as these amounts of refrigerants are now diminishing, we're actually going to have value. We're going to have worth in our recovered refrigerant. So I'm telling you, recover, recover, recover. Get that stuff back into the system so that we can keep the refrigerants in supply. So the mandate preceded the technology. So, boy, how often does that happen in the world, right? But think about this. Now, I get this a lot. You know, this is very much due to an escalation of global warming. Whether you believe in it or not, I see it in my own life. I can tell you 15 years ago, I seen my first example of global warming, right? I'm a mushroom hunter. For any of those in the Midwest, know what morel mushroom hunting is all about. You have mushroom holes that are up for about 3 weeks out of the year, and they are a legacy. You hunt in the same mushroom holes that hopefully your parents, grandparents, people do not tell where their secret mushroom holes are, right? They grow in the same area, the same temperature. The ground's got to be above 52 degrees Fahrenheit every year. It's a very specific place for those to grow. My mushroom hole back around 2006-ish started moving up the hill. It had been the same for decades. My son's grandfather found mushrooms in the exact same spot year after year. He's the one that told me where the spot was at. And then I started seeing my mushroom hole, my honey hole, moving up the hillside. And 5 years later, and ever since, there has never been a morel mushroom on that hillside, right? That is real climate change here in Indiana. I can't speak for what it looks like for everyone, but that is a significant change. And that was I was just a HVAC guy. That was before I was doing anything like I'm doing now. I spent most of my time in the woods. And when my woods started changing, I became aware that, yes, things are happening in the world. And so we became more aware of what we're doing. So it is very much about reducing our global warming potential. Remember, we focused on all those ODP refrigerants because of their ozone depleting potential. Then we started focus on the global warming potential of all of these HFCs. And those previous refrigerants, they had global warming potential to them. Everyone forgets that. All of our CFCs and HCFCs had global warming potential. I've actually, was it on this slide or was it on the other one? Hold on here. Let me back up for a second. Hold on now. All right, so let's take a look at this real quick. I should have said this when we were here. If we look at R12, we always squawk about the ozone depleting potential of R12. No one ever talks about the global warming potential of R12. No one talks about the global warming potential on R22, right? So these are global warming potentials that were in refrigerants before global warming potential was something that we talked about on a daily basis. So we are in this phase down. CFC and HCFCs were a phase out, 100%. We went from a zero reduction to 100% reduction. Our HFCs, because of things like the R410A that we haven't found a replacement for, we couldn't just jump off from the plane and go, they're gone. We had to go, okay, it's going to take us a little time to make this happen. Let's do everything that we can. Let's transition this down. So we're going to be transition it down by 85% no later than 2036. And that can be adjusted. There are specifications in there that would allow for that to be escalated. But it would also take another act of Congress. It would take another signing of a president. It would take a new amendment to an act. Not an easy or fast thing to do. So, Howard, let's talk about something that happened before that Kigali Amendment was signed. Remember, it was just sitting there. And as a world, we're going, man, we got to do something. Let's get this puppy up and rolling. And so we actually put into motion something that many of us are very new to. It's called the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act of 2020. The A.I.M Act, as it is now known, was actually brought about by President Trump. So in that time period, President Trump had not signed the Kigali Amendment, but absolutely signed and put into motion the A.I.M Act, which was a huge step towards our HFC reduction. So the same numbers, the same initiative that the Kigali Amendment was not being successfully driven to, was added into the A.I.M Act so that it would be signed by a president and put into motion. So we actually put our HFC phase down into play with the A.I.M Act shortly before it was ratified in the Kigali Amendment. And people go, wait, no one's ever said that. But it's the truth.
But there's two elements of it people should look at.
Yeah.
Jobs.
Oh, that's it.
And stating temporary. I'll take those both one at a time. The vast majority of refrigerants are made where? In the United States.
Right here. It's us.
But the rest of the world had already started transitioning to other refrigerants.
Yes.
When we adopted R410A, it stated this is a temporary replacement.
We forgot.
And we forgot that. And if you read the A.I.M Act, it says that the next generation refrigerants, which we now have in many states, are a temporary replacement.
Wait a minute. What did you just say?
We will see another transition potentially in 2035 to 2040. Right. We don't know exactly when, but we're not the leaders in this. Europe and other places that are being innovative are taking the leading role.
Looking at what the options are.
So if you don't like change, change is inevitable.
Yes, it is.
You know, and as Jason Objut of our team always says, I don't care if chocolate milk's a refrigerant, just tell me how to safely use it. If we adapt that knowledge of saying, okay, refrigerants are changing. What are their characteristics? How do I safely work with them? Are there new tools I need? That's the essence of what you need to know. But the big thing that people kind of forget when they say, why did President Trump sign this? It was a jobs bill. He understood that this was actually, the A.I.M Act was authored by Senator Kennedy,
right,
a Republican from Louisiana, and he found a co-author, a Democrat, and what was happening was we had factories in this country that we were either going to retool and build for making the next generation refrigerants, or those were going to be made elsewhere.
Wow.
So it was a jobs bill.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
But I think the big thing is the word temporary.
Right. So we know that even what we are getting ready to call next generation refrigerants are not the 50-year plan, not the 100-year plan, but they are the best plan, right? So we are making a transition into these lower GWP refrigerants.
And Clifton, I just like to throw something in here. Probably the number one comment we see on social media is, oh, the refrigerant manufacturers and the manufacturers are just doing this because they want to make more money. This couldn't be further from the truth.
Absolutely.
If Honeywell and Chemours and others could have just kept making R22 forever in those same factories, it's far more profitable than retooling or making a new factory.
Absolutely.
They're just complying with regulatory changes like the rest of us.
Exactly. We start as a world. We join forces to create treaties, If the treaties are adopted, we create acts of Congress that have to be voted on by a president who then assigns everyone else to do their work. It's a very regimented sequence of operation. And where does ESCO end up? We end actually kind of down at the bottom. One of the comments earlier, are we ahead of the cart? Well, how many times are government regulations dispatched ahead of the cart? Commonly, right? So what does ESCO do? ESCO recognizes what that is. How many times, Howard, has ESCO been a participant in voting and putting comments and discussing these things with the EPA and even the Department of Energy in the past?
We work with various government agencies, and continually they ask for input. We provide it. That might be part of the proposed rule. It might be an in-person meeting. We have spent countless times at in-person meetings, online meetings, and I think you just hit a word that a lot of people don't understand. It's the ruling. How does all of this, so when the A.I.M Act or the Kigali Amendment or any of them, they all wind up as a ruling where, Clifton? The Federal Register.
Registry. That's
And,
where
and
we
what
follow a
people,
lot. Howard's on it every day, seeing what's going on. Is there anything we need to be aware of? That's where we fall in the industry. We try to stay ahead of where we are so that we can get you the information. And we're getting ready to talk about some things that's happening in a few weeks that could be very impactful to our industry. And we want you here with us in our community so that we can all go through this together, so that we can see it and we can understand it and go, oh, this is why. So the federal government's not going to be doing the training, and the EPA is going to expect us to do training. Who's creating it? Well, typically it falls into the hands of companies like us who try to disseminate all of the information and the transitions and stay ahead of the game. They're,
I'd like to just add something, Clifton, on
yeah,
timing and ruling.
yeah,
So before a proposed rule, an agency will normally gather industry stakeholder input.
yep,
So back 15 years ago, the EPA was already looking at stakeholder input, realizing technology was moving quicker than the regulations.
right.
And once they had gathered all the information, they issued what's called a proposed rule. So you go to the Federal Register in the morning, you read it. It used to be a book, now it's online, and it says there's this proposed rule. That proposed rule has a comment period where they add up typically 30 to 60 days, but on something more complex, it could be up to 6 months. After they get the comments, they disseminate the information, and then they take an action, and they typically will finalize a rule. So all of this has a process that, if people remember, 2011, the EPA started talking about changing the regulations.
Yes, absolutely.
2015, they're on a circuit going around to all the big conferences.
Wanting to know.
2016, they put out a ruling. Then we had changes implemented in 17, 18, and 19, phased in. That all took 3/4 of a decade to happen.
Okay, brings up a great point. So let's talk about. So we kind of talked about what the A.I.M Act did, right? So the A.I.M Act set into play all this stuff. It reinforced the HFC phase down, set us into play. So we had two things running. We had the A.I.M Act going for us. We had the Kigali Amendment going. We are phasing down HFCs because of both of those initiatives. And here is where it gets to the point that we are today, talking about what things are coming. For those of you that are joining us, anyone out there in the audience, were you at the 2023 HVAC Excellence National HVAC National HVACR Education Conference?
Do I count?
Yeah, we count. Absolutely. So, Howard, who did we see this year that we didn't see last year?
Well, we had a little over 1,000 folks there. What I found interesting was how many new people there were, first of all. Younger people, a lot of older technicians, older teachers, all retired.
Yeah.
But what we saw was there's more change going on right now than most people remember in their entire career.
That's exactly right.
And the reason the doors were packed and the classes were packed were people understood I'm getting firsthand information from the Department of Energy.
That's where I was going. We had the Department of
And
Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency at the conference, and they have already signed up for this coming year. So it
and the
goes
fun
back.
part of that is they, even though they have course descriptions out there, that could change. There's
That's
so
right.
much that could change in just a couple months.
Yeah. Well, a few weeks, actually. So let's think about this. All right. What can happen? What's going to happen? What can happen? Where's the potential? Where's the ability within the EPA? Right? A lot of questions that come in for us on, is my 608 still the same? Now that I'm working with these low GWP refrigerants, is it the same? Do I need to be? No, there's a lot different that we need to be trained on. But the EPA only has certain things that they can do. And there are things that, all right, let's take a look at this. What did the A.I.M Act justify for that? The American Innovations Manufacturing Act in the management of regulated substances has the clause of, including requiring where appropriate that any such servicing, repair, disposal, or installation be performed by a trained technician meeting minimum standards as determined by the administrator. That could be your 608, but it might not, right? So
So the EPA always said, first of all, they did not require recertification, but they reserved the right to do so.
exactly.
They, when you're reading this, it's very ambiguous. They could say, you know what, moving forward, there's a type 4, a new type of certification for the next generation refrigerants. They could say everyone has to take a continuing education class. We don't know what they'll decide. We do know this is a proposed ruling right now. And this is going to be fascinating because regardless, change is here.
Changes here, and there are going to be things that we are going to be expected to be aware of. So this is leading into another conversation. So with the Environmental Protection Agency, they're at the conference this year. They're planning on being next year. They're saying, hey, we can't discuss just yet what that's going to be because there are some things in between there that we have going on, including this thing we're going to talk about here in a second, that could bring about some change within our industry. And so we are partners, we are industry partners with the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as the Department of Energy and Department of Education, to make sure that we stay up to date. Because you and I actually signed off when we took our 608 that we were responsible to stay up to date on regulatory changes within the industry. Whether you remember that or not, you did. Because people say, well, when did all this stuff change? Well, it's been changing all along. Many of us just weren't staying up to date with what was changing. Could that be the industry not providing resources? Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there, but now we are making sure that here at ESCO and HVAC Excellence, we're pounding in and we're ringing the bell every single week going, we love you all. We want you here. We're building our resources, things like our low GWP. Are you ready to be trained for low GWP refrigerants right now ahead of schedule? Come on over. We've been doing it for a couple of years. So we've got the e-training course, we've got books, we've got the certification so you can be ahead of the game and be low GWP prepared. Could that change with the requirements from the EPA? It's very possible, but why not already have it under your belt and be ready to go, right? Because some things are coming no matter what. I mean, everyone calls us. How do we get prepared for low GWP refrigerants? Is EPA changing things? Well, very possibly. How about you just do your best and be prepared ahead of time just to make sure? Because these refrigerants are already out there. And a lot of our manufacturers are changing their equipment lines over as the first of the year going into our split systems with our low GWP refrigerants. All of our window units, all of our stationary type 1 stuff, we're already converted over to R32. It's already out there. So in that A.I.M Act, we added some additional stuff. So yeah, we've got these 608 things that we can talk about, but we've also added sections 113, 114, 304, and 307 at the disposal of the Environmental Protection Agency that brings up some new opportunities for the EPA to go, well, yep, now we got some jurisdiction in the citizen suits. We have jurisdiction in administrative proceedings and judicial review. But wait a minute. A.I.M Act give us some federal enforcement. And it also give us some record keeping, inspections, monitoring, and entry at the disposal of the Environmental Protection Agency, directed by the A.I.M Act, right? Do they use that or not? We're getting ready to see because of the technology transition rule. Wait, what's that? A lot of people don't know anything about this, and you better, because I personally, I see the technology transition rule as being, Kevin, it should pop into the chat. If not, I'll hurry up and throw that back up there for you for sure. If you're not aware what this is something that has a driving force powered by changes in technology, regulated even through the Environmental Protection Agency. Wait a minute. Now we're talking technology and refrigerant transition at the same time. Brett, how are you, buddy? Appreciate you joining us. So what does it do? It's very new. So the technology transition rule is going to be some fire in the industry on education. So now we're not talking about distributed by authorization of the President of the United States. We're talking about President of the United States authorizing something that makes its way to a department that is now initiated by an agency, the Environmental Protection Agency. The technology transition rule does this. Consistent with the A.I.M Act, the EPA is proposing to restrict the use of certain higher global warming potential GWP refrigerants like hydrofluorocarbons in aerosols, foams, refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump products and equipment. The proposed rule would prohibit the manufacture and import of products containing these HFCs by January 25. Could even be earlier than January of 25. In most cases, it would prohibit the sale, distribution, export R410A, 134A products. This right here eliminates them before the Kigali and HFC phase down impacts the equipment. Now, there's something to rattle through your brain. What do you think about that?
I think that people need to realize we're in the fourth quarter of 2023.
Yeah, the game hadn't started. Game's
2025 is almost here.
Yeah. We are a year and a couple months away from equipment no longer able to have HFC refrigerants in it. So no matter what we do through the A.I.M Act and the Kigali Amendment for HFC phase downs, a whole nother animal is very likely going to push all of that into just a couple of years.
Well, that's why we keep saying recover, recover, recover.
Recover. I mean, it could absolutely change the way we look at our entire industry within a 1 to 2 year window. So let's talk about things like hey, hold on a minute. We got a special guest hopping in here. Hold on now. I can get over here to my design studio. So we're wanting to make sure we get special guest. And as we're talking about subject matter experts earlier, hold on just a minute, everybody. Special guest on the way.
Thanks for the nice little intro. That was pretty neat. I didn't expect that. How we doing, everybody? Long time listener, first time caller.
Jason,
interesting discussion,
isn't it? Though we got to talk about this stuff. And you're right at the heart of all these refrigerant transitions. I mean, you're sitting on committees that people couldn't even imagine the things that you're doing right now, and it's all about exactly what we're talking about.
So a lot of this stuff again is being brought on. The EPA didn't just one day decide to say, "Hey, this sounds good. Yeah. Let's try this."
Wow!
Right? In the A.I.M Act, they are demanded to do this stuff.
Right.
All right. They are directed by these statements in the A.I.M Act. It doesn't say, "Hey, you could possibly do this." It says, "No, we expect you to do this." Yes, you are expected to, accomplish these goals. Find a way to do it. Right. So a lot of this isn't happening on a whim. A lot of this is, again, the winds of change are upon us. And believe it or not, we're kind of behind the rest of the world in this. They've already changed to 32, 454B. They've been using A2Ls and A3s for quite a long time. And we're just now starting to catch up with that. Yes, that was a very fancy intro. I will say that. So one of the questions is, all right, there was a great question earlier that was brought up. Well, why isn't there a replacement for 410A? Well, it has a lot of, for one, as you mentioned, it's got to meet all of the design characteristics, but it also has to meet the low GWP moniker. It has to be below this GWP level, 0 ODP. There's a lot of other things. Then it has to be tested and approved by S.N.A.P. And then it can, there's a lot that goes into having a refrigerant approved.
Wait a minute. What? S.N.A.P. Yeah. What is S.N.A.P.?
I hear that section of the Clean Air Act. It's actually section 612 of the Clean Air Act.
Ah, there we go. Okay.
And it's what approves substitutes in specific applications. So it doesn't say, okay, R32 is approved and it's R32 across the board.
Right.
It is a refrigerant for a very specific section of our industry.
This can work for this, or this.
Right.
Can work
this
for
one
that,
goes here. This
but
one goes
it doesn't
here.
work for everybody.
Right. It's not a blanket approval of a refrigerant across the board. It's refrigerants for specific applications.
Okay.
Now, R32 has been used for a long time, but it hasn't been allowed in specific applications.
Right.
And in 2 recent S.N.A.P. rulings, it's been approved in a variety of applications.
Yeah.
A lot of people also don't realize R32 is an HFC itself.
Yeah.
So when you say, oh, it's my 608 covers HFCs and R32 is an HFC.
410A. 50% 32, 50% 125. People go, what are you talking about? I'm like,
yeah,
it's 32 at its base. It always has been.
So these, what you put up there earlier, the technology transition rule, what that does is place GWP limits on new equipment starting in January 1, 2025. That's one of those proposed rules.
15 months.
Yeah. I mean, it's due to be finalized here in October. So those numbers, they're probably going to be very close to what we saw on the screen there for specific. So it looks at an application, whether it be residential, light commercial, comfort cooling, industrial process refrigeration, ice makers. Yeah. It looks at 70 or 80 subsectors, and it assigns a GWP limit for each of those sectors based on what alternative refrigerants are available for those applications.
Right. And we're getting ready to vote on that. And so think about this.
Like, it's going to be finalized in October.
Howard, how long does it take for us to figure out how to retool an industry, a company?
A long time. That's part of one of the discussions Jason and I had at the EPA at a hearing a few years ago. Let's just say there's a ruling and it says we have to create this new training resource for starters. Jason writes a textbook. How often is that textbook reviewed?
Every 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. So that means if you just came out with it, it's 4 years
where you're in the cycle. Yeah.
You can't just go say there's 50,000 copies sitting out there. Let's go recall them all. Let's start taking a look at what tools are needed. Do they exist? Do they need to be developed? So when you start looking at the overall process, number one, we have to educate all the proctors, what changes are coming. Number two, we have to train the trainer programs for everyone. Number three, you have to change the curriculum. Number four, you're looking at very often creating new tools, might be non-spark tools, as we've talked about before.
Yeah.
And then how do you even educate the whole industry that, which is supposed, as Eugene put a comment there, is supposed to keep apprised of changes.
Yeah.
Often doesn't. So, no. Jason, remember January 1st, 2017, 2018?
Yeah, I do.
There were changes to the regulations. So even though you were certified already, you had to, January 1st, 2019, new lower leak rates, remember?
Yeah, so let's think about this. If you have taken your EPA608 from a company other than ESCO that hasn't updated their content in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you have missed so much stuff. There are a lot of things that have been updated along the way that you don't even know about. There are things that could be voted on here in a few weeks and you go, wait, where did that come from? And we go, actually 2016, that's where this started. So, there's that chart and we've got copies of this. We've got we'll get a PDF. So Jason put together a really good looking S.N.A.P. 26 ruling PDF. Anybody needs that, get a hold of us. So we'll make sure to get access for that for you. And so that takes care of those refrigerants. But like in 2016, a lot of people don't know about the things that happen with like record keeping and leak rates, things that changed from 2016 with an amendment and then had an additional follow-up in 2020 to clarify what refrigerants were covered by those things that are going to potentially be reviewed again here in a few weeks when they're doing this transitional technology transition rule vote. It's here in a few weeks.
So yeah, as I mentioned, we expect the technology transition rule to be finalized in October. So we'll get the GWP limits per sector by then, and we'll also probably get the sell-through date for any legacy equipment that we have sitting in stock.
Exactly.
If we're stockpiling equipment, we can only sell it through
X
whatever. So we should see that. And we're going to see some other things here that we'll bring up in a few slides. I'll let you get back to your timeline here, but
that's all right. This was just a great one that Howard, you want to tell us a little bit about? We kind of talked about this a couple different times. You can't just change things overnight. Here's a perfect example.
I showed this to Clifton earlier. This is from Jason, you and I, back in 2018, some of the meetings we were in. This just gives people an idea of how long it takes from a prototype to being something that goes out in the industry. So for example, one of the changes in the clean air, in the refrigerant regulations, it addressed how things are worked on airlines.
Right.
Fire suppression. So fire suppression may be something we could test out here, at ground level.
Right.
But what about testing it through the FAA at 30 and 40,000 feet? How about it being internationally accepted?
Yeah.
We found some other things that were pertaining to NASA and refrigerants that they used. So the whole idea, this is a great picture to show why isn't there a retrofit for 410A? Well, how long does it take a refrigerant manufacturer to come up with the idea in their R&D facility that meets all the criteria? Then what are all the processes they have to go through along the way, from getting it approved from different agencies, S.N.A.P approved? Could be a decade.
Think about the headaches that our equipment manufacturers are facing.
If the R&D alone has got to be...
If all of your R&D in the past has been new equipment design, and all of a sudden in a very short period of time you go, by the way,
retrofit,
you got to design new equipment, and what refrigerant are you going to design to go in your existing systems? And by the way, it's not going to be the same refrigerants going in new systems. They have so much to do in a short period of time. It took 9 years to develop a new refrigerant for those particular applications in aeronautical. And some of these manufacturers are going to have, look at the VRV stuff. If this gets voted on here in a few weeks, that's January 2026. So a little over 2 years, they have to completely rethink their refrigerant management plan. That's a lot. That is a lot of retooling. Why are we doing it? We keep saying it. We are in the midst of the putting our feet forward for reducing global warming. And we're doing it very, very rapidly. Howard, you said it. We're in a state that our industry has never seen before. That's the reason we're here. It's the reason we've pulled together as resources to go, hey, everyone, we've always been here helping you along. Most of these transitions have been a little bit slower, and we've been able to help you through it. We've got how many 700 some thousand EPA universal certifications we were looking at, Howard?
We have over 2 million credentials and like 1.4 million on the EPA. But here, we're all like this. We only see what's right in front of us.
Exactly.
In Clifton, think about it. When you joined the Johnstone team originally, you started traveling to other states.
Yep.
Then you joined the ESCO team, and you're traveling around the country. You start to see the industry very differently. So separate from what you've got on screen, we talk about the changes. Mm-hmm. You and I spent a lot of time talking about the shift to next generation heat pumps, specifically for cold climate heat pumps.
Right.
Similarly, we've got this phase down, which is going to create profound economic impact on everyone in the industry. I think the simple thing everyone needs to understand is crucial. It's crucial we adapt, educate ourselves, and change.
That's it.
I also wanted to point out, we've been throwing this GWP number out there, this global warming potential number, that for some of you that don't know what it is, CO2 has a GWP of 1. When we were throwing those numbers at 1,700 and 2,000, what does that mean? What that means is, for example, 410A is 2,088. What that means is that 410A released into the atmosphere will trap 2,088 times as much heat as CO2 by itself over the same time period. So, I mean, when we look at these numbers in the thousands, it is orders of magnitude higher than CO2 at trapping heat within the atmosphere. And that's a scientific fact. All right. Absolutely. Those are tested and measured. And I mean, there's, you can't argue with that. You can, global
you can dispute it all you want.
Right. But those numbers are facts.
Reality's reality.
That's science. Right.
So we're getting into refrigerants that have GWPs in the single digits. So we're making significant leaps and bounds.
But as that GWP starts to come down, right, flammability tends to come up.
which is why it's so important to stay with these resources. We keep talking about flammability. We keep talking about A2Ls, A3s. We want you in the loop. We want you to know where your resources are. We can keep you up to date with all of them. What are you looking for? We have you covered. Are you wanting to keep up with 608? Is this all new to you and you just want to get into 608 and know what we're even talking about? We have all of the resources right here, escogroup.org, to get you in the loop. Get you in with every resource that you need. All of this stuff that we've talked about, it's not like things that we just recreate from scratch. Every bit of the resources that was used today in this class came from EPA.org. I say that. Yeah, even all the presidents were verified in EPA.org. All I had to do is go back into the registry and look at which president was signing for each one of them along the way, which one didn't sign along the way. So
I do want to throw out there before we have to leave that, as I mentioned, the technology transition rule is going to be finalized in October. We also anticipate another ruling here in September, and that deals with subsection H.
And that was
that's a shameless plug. You can
that's a good plug right there. Well, and I kind of talk about this, and so for those of you that were in earlier, this was actually presented by the EPA at our conference this year, prepping us for this.
And again, this is another one of the things that they are directed to do. They have to achieve this list of goals, and they have to do it within a certain time frame. So sometime in September, toward the end of September, we're going to get another proposed rule from the EPA that deals with these specifically, these topics. And one of the topics, I will address the GWP. It's based on metric tons. Yeah, it's based in metric tons. One of the things that they're going to look at is technician and consumer safety. And the other is going to be reclamation. I saw a comment earlier about, I don't know if the refrigerant's contaminated or mixed. Listen, the old school thing that once refrigerant was mixed, it had to be destroyed because there was that doesn't exist anymore. Manufacturers of the reclamation equipment have well beyond what we had in the 90s. All right. They can separate just about anything and make it profitable these days.
Absolutely.
So even if it's mixed, bring it in.
They still want it
for it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's these refrigerant analyzers. They stick it right on there. It'll tell you what percentage of what refrigerant's in that tank. And again, what's it worth to you? Obviously, the cleaner it is, the more money it's worth. But even if it's mixed, it's still worth money at this point.
Still value.
Right. There's a lot of value into this. That was an AHRI guideline. Sorry, the question says, when did they decide to get rid of the color codes? It was 2016 or 17, and set to take effect in 2019. It was an AHRI guideline. They were running out of colors. Colors were fading.
Absolutely.
Tanks started looking too similar. There's only so many blues and greens, and people that are colorblind were having even worse issues with it. So they just went to a solid gray, and if it's flammable, it'll have that red stripe.
Have the stripe.
So getting back to this again, before we run out of time here.
Sure.
In this ruling, we may see something that's going to require either a certification on safe handling of low GWP refrigerant,
which is already done for you,
but a requirement to do so. Right now we're doing it voluntarily, but there may be some requirement to do so, to ensure technician and end user or consumer safety. And there may be some beefed up things on reclamation as well, to again give us a little nudge in the direction of reclaiming this. Right.
That's all right.
The A.I.M Act and the Kigali Amendment do not apply to reclaimed refrigerant. So when we talk about this phase down where the percentages are going down, if we as an industry decided we were going to reclaim 80 billion pounds of 410A, guess what? That 80 billion pounds of 410A would stay in the economy as long as we could keep it there. There's nothing that says we can't do that. It's for the new refrigerant, right? The gas and go, and we're losing the refrigerant right out the line, or, oh, it's mixed, I'm not bringing it back, it's a hassle. It's not. It has value. We need to start looking at that refrigerant in the line as a commodity and not as a roadblock.
Absolutely. We think about those
new
refrigerants.
Ruling in September, new ruling in October. Got to get that out there.
Absolutely. If we make this transition and say we make this HFC transition faster due to potentially through like our technology transition rule, and we transition to other refrigerants, well, there's going to be a big shortage of those HFCs unless we bring them back.
Right. We need to make up the percentages that are coming down with what we're bringing back so that we can try and keep a stable market.
if we can stabilize the market if we bring back the refrigerant that we are supposed to be bringing back. Absolutely.
So I'll just say one quick thing. For those of you who took the test over 5 years ago, there's an online course right on our website, on our e-learning. There's also a low GWP course. They'll help you understand what's going on. You want to get the firsthand information on everything? Come to the conference. You're going to get, we've got key figures from the EPA, Department of Energy, pioneering people from manufacturers. I forget how many people we have, but we have, I think, 88 classes.
Oh, no, we had hundreds of applications. I mean, it's going to be a rock solid, rock star year this year. I want you all to come join us.
And then there's one last thing I'll say.
Yeah.
Subscribe to Clifton Show. If you're not already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's some great content there. If you're afraid of working with A2Ls, watch this flammability video.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a lot of things here for you. That's what we do. We make sure you have the resources
today. Yeah.
Yeah, this is some really good stuff. We're grateful everyone is joining. We're going to give a couple more minutes. Anyone have any questions that you would like for us to attempt to answer for you? We don't know it all, but I tell you what, we spend a lot of resources in learning as much as we possibly can.
And I will tell you that when these rulings come out, September and October, we will be bringing you the translation, if you will, from the legal and engineering speak into regular English. This is what it means for you. So the proposed rule in September and the finalized rule in October, when they do come out, look for us. We will get you the information. What's relevant to you? What's relevant to the industry? What do you need to know? We will let you know.
If you're subscribed to our YouTube channel or follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see the breaking news story.
That's exactly right. Wow, great stuff. This is like setting up an opportunity for like 4 or 5 different follow-up episodes. You know that, right?
It is, yes. And we had some good audience participation today. I like that. A lot of good questions.
Lots of good stuff out there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us so much. We really look forward to seeing you again next week on Did You Know, the ESCO HVAC show. And yes, get over to YouTube. Subscribe. Keep that thing rolling. The more you subscribe, the more you watch, the more it'll push it out to everyone else out in the industry that needs it as well. So let's do this together.
Thanks, Clifton.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.